Welcome. It's great to have you here for this guided meditation and Dharma talk. My name is Jonathan Foust, and thank you so much for making the time to be here. Before we begin, we have our traditional thank yous. The first thank you goes out to Glenn Harrison and Leo Gimo, who produced this event. Also to the Insight Meditation community of Washington for being a host, as well as to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington in Arlington, Virginia. Also, a big, huge thank you to our mindful movement teachers. If you're interested in doing some mindful movement before the class, it's a beautiful way to kind of prepare yourself for meditation for the talk. And as well, after the talk, you can join mindful dialogue with Ray Manioki and Tara Cassidy. So you can check my website, check the Facebook page if you want to get those Zoom links for mindful meditation before and mindful dialogue after. The whole Monday night experience and East Coast time is 6:30 mindful movement, 7:30 this meditation, 8 o'clock into the talk, and then around 8:50 or somewhere in there after the talk, you can join mindful dialogue. So it's great to have you here. Thank you so much for making the time. If you want to be on the mailing list, I send out for this class, I send out a little reminder of the next topic. And there's also a monthly, which gives a review of the talks and resources, and I inflict my latest photographs on you as well. You can sign up for that on my website. And just to say, this is all offered freely. The whole idea here is that no one is denied access to the teaching, so there's no cost. But there is a cost in producing this. And if you feel at all inspired to make a donation to ensure that these teachings can get out freely to anyone who's interested, please feel free to make a donation. Happily, gratefully, deeply accepted. It's really kind of a wonderful thing. And what's so wonderful is we get to practice together. And from my standpoint, to be able to share these practices and hear from people around the world about how their practice is going and how these teachings are helpful, it's extremely fulfilling. So really, really glad to be here. Tonight's talk is a kind of a continuation of working with fear and anxiety, and we're going to be exploring kind of the short-term anxiety or the intensified form of anxiety, which is how you work with panic, that fear of loss of control, the intense anxiety that peaks. And if panic and this sort of intensive anxiety is not an issue for you, savor that. But you may find it helpful in supporting other people who may be struggling at different times. So with that, we're going to take some time for our practice. You'll want to make sure that you are undisturbed, or that if you are being disturbed, it's not going to bug you. Good to turn off your cell phone and have a little space around you. Tell you what, why don't we do kind of the traditional kind of reset the spine practice, which I find helpful for myself. The hands are in hitchhiker position, thumbs pointing up. Turn the thumbs so they're pointing behind you. Bring your fists about equal with your ears. Vary this however you need to for yourself. And now what I like to do is to sort of open the elbows out to the side, just enough so I'm taking kind of the slack out of the muscles. So there's no strain, but just a sense of being lightly engaged. You might find it helpful to close your eyes, and you might find it helpful to begin to slow down and to deepen your breath a little bit. And if you want to get a little more focused, try breathing into the count of 4 or 5, then immediately exhaling to the count of 4 or 5. You might draw the navel in toward your spine to kind of activate the core, lift up out of the waist. And here's the real focus here. Draw your shoulder blades close together. And as you draw the shoulder blades close together, stay in touch with your breath, long and slow and full and deep. And what you'll find is, as you breathe in, you can draw the breath up under your collarbones, inflating the upper lobes of the lungs. On the exhalation, draw the navel in toward the spine, so you're kind of exaggerating the exhalation, forcing all the stale air out of the lungs. What you're doing here is you're lengthening the muscles that get chronically shortened across the front of your chest, and you're taking the slack out of the muscles that get chronically lengthened. Now, the miraculous thing here is it only takes between 60 to 90 seconds, and we're closing in on that if you take 2 more long, deep breaths. Actively draw the shoulder blades close together. You might lift the chin a little bit if that feels good for you, and then reach your arms up overhead, stretch up to the left side and the right side. Let out any sounds. You're on mute. I'm not. And you can slowly let your arms float down, coming to rest anywhere that feels comfortable for you. And as you're ready, you can now just let the attention settle inside a little bit. And notice where you feel the breath. Where do you feel the breath the most predominant right now? And you might find it helpful, particularly in the beginning of the meditation, to do a little bit of controlled, focused breathing. Breathing in slowly to the count of 4 or 5. Gliding right into the exhalation to 4 or 5. And for the next minute or so, how much can you focus on this flow of the breath, matching the length of the in-breath with the length of the out-breath, and tracking whatever might move or shift or change on the inside? If you'd like to try a little adjustment to your breath, you might extend the exhalation just a little bit. So maybe you're breathing in to count of 4 or 5, but then you're exhaling to maybe 6 or 7 and focusing more on relaxing on the out-breath. Notice the effect on the mind. You may begin to sense this quality of gathering your awareness in the here and now. And as you're ready now, you might very gently begin to release the control of the breath and move into feeling the breath. Imagine and feel your breath completely unrestricted, free-flowing. And drawing your attention now even more intimately inside. And feel your forehead smooth. Explore if you could relax or soften the little muscles around your eyes. Is it possible to let the jaw soften a little bit? Let the jaw kind of relax away from the skull. And you might feel your face now smooth, expressionless, like the face on a marble statue. Can you feel now the inside of your mouth? And the weight and the volume of your tongue. The volume of your lips. You might find it helpful to bring your attention to the back of the head and to the base of the skull, right along the occipital ridge. And just notice, feel, sense if you can soften right here at the base of the skull. And sensing now the back of the neck and the tops of the shoulders. And the space inside your throat. And feeling the weight and the volume of your arms as you sense from the shoulders down through your elbows. The elbows down through the wrists. Is it possible to soften your palms and the backs of the hands, the fingers, thumbs? And can you feel the space between your breastbone and your spine? And can you feel the space between your navel and your spine? And can you in any way soften the lower back, the buttocks, the floor, the pelvis, the hip joints? Sensing now down the length of the legs, as if you could sense through the center of the bones, the hip joints down through the knees. The knees down through the ankles. The tops of the feet and the toes. And the soles of the feet and the heels. Is there anything right now that could relax or soften inside? And can you feel this sense of relaxed, present moment awareness? And here you might bring your attention to an anchor of your choosing, to breath or sound or the feeling in the palms of the hands. And let this be your doorway back to the here and now when you notice the mind naturally wandering. Sensing from the inside the movement of the breath or the vibration of sound or the sense of pulse or tingling, aliveness inside. Noting the quality of here and now. As I breathe in, I'm aware of breathing in. As I breathe out, I relax and rest in presence. Noting the sounds that are only happening in the here and now. The vibration of sounds all around you. The sense of pulse or tingling or vibration, aliveness inside. Relaxing and receiving this unfolding moment. And you might notice a heightened perspective, a heightened sense of all that is changing. This seat of the witness or the observer. And you might, as it feels right for you, allow your awareness to widen and open and broaden. Opening to notice this field of change. Deeply relaxed, alert, awake to what is changing, and in your own way, exploring what it means to let things be. One element of this practice is deep relaxation. And can you again feel your face expressionless? Relax, feel the weight of the tongue. The weight of the arms. Sensing from inside the palms. Soles of the feet and the heels. Another element is this use of an anchor. And you might, over the next 3 breaths, just notice how intimately you can feel your anchor from the inside. Another element or quality of this practice is this sense of observation without judgment. Sensing all that is changing and holding it in this quality of preferenceless awareness. There are qualities of this practice that have an element of doing, willfully re-arriving at the point of your anchor. And there's also a quality you might like to explore in these remaining minutes, which is the release of doing and an exploration into being. You might release any sense of focus or control of your anchor, any sense of manipulation of your awareness, and explore what it's like to take the step backward, opening into this field of pure, relaxed awareness. Like clouds passing in the sky, phenomena will pass through the screen of your consciousness. Can you let it be? Is it possible to relax, to soften, and to allow all things to be just as they are? Is it possible to soften or relax even more right now? Is it possible to let go and let be even more? In the absence of any effort, of any doing, what arises for you right now? What do you feel? What do you notice? And you might very, very gently now, very slowly feel the breath. And you might deepen the breath just a little bit. Notice the quality of presence, the space, the sounds around you, and who you are as the one who is aware right now. And you might, in your own time, let your head drift a little bit to the left and to the right. And take some time to let your body move and stretch in any way that feels good for you. And again, you might reach your arms up overhead, let out any sounds. Welcome back, and welcome. A good number of years ago now, I was at Spirit Rock Meditation Center out in Woodacre, California, on a retreat, and I was the mindful movement leader. So I would be leading the movement early in the morning. I forget when, maybe 6 in the morning or something like that. And probably about day 3 or day 4, I had a pretty nasty virus. I'm not sure what was going on, but it felt pretty awful. But it got really bad overnight, and I couldn't find anyone to substitute for me. So I went to lead the mindful movement class, feeling pretty terrible. Mostly nausea and headache and so forth. And I realized as I was leading the class that I was going to, as they say, get violently sick. And I could just feel this, I felt terrible, but on top of that, I felt all the anxiety around how do I lead this mindful movement class, and what if I have to leave and do what I need to do, and sweating and just feeling this really, really heightened sense of tension. And as it was getting more and more chronic, I suddenly had this idea. So I had people come into the mountain pose, with the arms up overhead. And then I just said, and now we're going to move into a slow motion meditation. And you're going to slowly let your arms come down to your sides. And then you're going to very, very, very slowly come down to the child pose on the floor and allow yourself to completely rest and relax and feel. So once I gave that instruction, that allowed me to step out of the room, run down a flight of stairs, throw up intensely about 3 times, then dry heave intensely for another 3 or 4 times, wash my hands, rinse out my mouth, race back upstairs. Everyone's in the child pose. And then I could say, and now we're going to, and we went into the next thing. That was one of my more dramatic experiences of dealing with short-term panic. And it actually leads to what I'd like to talk about. I wouldn't say it was a full-blown panic attack, but it had those elements of when we feel panic, we sort of move into the very, very short-term feeling of being out of control. And we've been talking about fear, or I've been talking about fear and anxiety these last number of weeks. And someone had a really, really wonderful request where they were saying, you've been talking about long-term anxiety. What about short-term anxiety? What do you do when you're suddenly feeling that sense of panic, or you're feeling a little bit of that sense of like everything's out of control? And I thought that might be a really juicy thing to talk about. And my hope is that you may not have a lot of experiences of having panic attacks or working with that kind of short-term, intense anxiety. But chances are you either know someone or you will meet someone who might be going through that very, very intense wave of experience. So my hope is that if you have any experience of working with this sort of intense anxiety, this might be helpful. And you might find, because we'll kind of get into some of the practical stuff of how you could support someone when they're feeling that sense of kind of intense dread, anxiety, and panic. So I'd like to talk about this fundamental stance we have, each of us has, of yourself against the world. I'll talk as well about like the arising of the clench, like when you have that sense of like something's wrong, and then about that sense of self-awareness and self-diagnosis, and then how do you work with riding the intense wave of a panic or intense anxiety. I want to assure you I am not an expert or an authority on this. There are great resources out there that can really, really help you or help someone you know and love. But I hope this might be helpful. I have found that exploring how to get more familiar with anxiety, getting more familiar with stress, with fear, has been so helpful for me. So we have this sense of kind of who we are against the world. And when I was in the Peace Corps in West Africa, I managed to slip out for some travel. I was biking around Europe for a while, and I remember I was in southern France. I was traveling alone as I always did, and I was in Marseille, and I was having an amazing time just on the streets, just the aliveness of the streets. This Marseille is this port city and really, really kind of exotic space, and just wandering around, having a great time. And for some reason, I don't know why, I just turned around, and there was a guy with a knife coming toward me. And then very quickly, for whatever reason, he pocketed the knife and he changed the direction and he kind of walked off. I'm pretty sure I was about as naive a guy as possible on the port of Marseille at that time. I was a perfect mark. I was a tourist with a backpack. But something in me had me turn just at that moment, and I don't know what that function was. And I'm not sure what his intentions were. Later I thought, what did he really have a knife? And he may have planned to do the kind of the classic thing that many people do, is you have a knife and you actually cut someone's backpack and take out what's in the backpack as they're walking. He may have seen a policeman. He may have realized as he got closer to me that I'm 6'5". That experience didn't ruin my adventure that summer, but it did add a certain awareness to my travels. I was just a little bit more aware of where am I and am I safe? And I'm sure you're aware of this basic function of consciousness, the don't die function. This is a part of the mind that's designed toward self-preservation. It's designed toward control. And it's all about scanning for danger to ensure that you're safe. Very, very helpful part of our consciousness and of our awareness. What happens sometimes is that scanning for danger can kind of get flooded and overwhelmed, and the sense of panic or intense anxiety is that sense of feeling so much input that you kind of lose your capacity to self-soothe. You're sort of like you're trapped in threat mode, and for whatever reason you're struggling to kind of get out of that. I talked earlier of how when you're caught in anxiety, you're caught in threat mode. Everything is a threat. And so you're shut down and you're caught in self-preservation. When you can begin to kind of turn the corner on that, you then move into what some call opportunity mode, or what some might call like self-soothing mode, where suddenly you can realize, oh, I actually have options here. Let me explore how I can be with it. And it points toward these two wings of mindfulness. Wisdom, recognizing what's happening as it's happening. And then this realm of compassion of the heart, which is sensing, well, how can I be with this right now? Getting grounded, kind of getting access to that is where you can begin to shift your relationship to anxiety, and where you can begin to shift your relationship with the intense anxiety or panic when it occurs. So you may be familiar with Dan Harris. He wrote the book 10% Happier. He was a journalist for ABC News and quite famously had a panic attack on television. And I watched it recently, and I've met Dan. Tara did an interview with him in his studio in New York, so I got to hang out there a little bit with him. He was a contributing journalist for Good Morning America, and they kind of like threw the segment to him, and you can see how as he was starting into his little presentation, his eyes got a little bit wide. You could see his breath was starting to get very irregular. You could see that he was getting a little bit of the deer in the headlights. And basically into his segment, he went for maybe about 30 seconds, and then he just threw it back to the anchors again. He said, and that's all I have right now. And of course, they're professionals. They kind of went with the flow. And then afterward, he was just like, what happened? That was a big, big trigger for him. And he realized that he had this voice in his head, this kind of unrelenting, self-critical voice in his head. And he became very intrigued with this, like, how do I move through this? And he realized that for him, that very, very intense self-critic was always present. It would show up for him as outbursts of anger. It would show up in eating, kind of self-soothing through eating. He would go through these periods of his mind absolutely racing to the point where he was unable to focus. And so he kind of dealt with that voice of the unrelenting critic. He dealt with it by throwing himself into his career, volunteering, going into war zones. And as he started to work with a therapist around this, he realized that he was so caught up in trying to control that voice that when he came back from covering wars, then the panic attacks started to become more and more frequent. And so he was self-medicating. And part of the self-medication through recreational drugs was really kind of enhancing the panic attacks. And so in exploring his options, he decided to explore meditation. And then it became an absolute shift in his life. And now his life is very much around exploring meditation, exploring how to bring meditation into the world. And he wrote this book, 10% Happier, because he realized, you know what? This hasn't really cured me, but I'm at least 10% happier. And that's a pretty good percentage. And what I love about his story is it's a beautiful story of realizing that we can get caught and realizing that we can find a way through it. And of course, it points to these four cornerstones, what are referred to sometimes as the Four Noble Truths, that stress, suffering, dissatisfaction is part of life. The second, that there's a cause. The cause always has something to do with holding on, with clinging, with attachment, with identification. The third, you can let go. And the fourth, that there's a path. There are techniques and practices and observations that will support you. And not only learning how to let go, not only learning how to be happier, but learning how to be truly free. And because so much of this now is making its way to the West, there's so much more acceptance, which is very, very exciting. So you may have had a panic attack in the past. You may have felt that intense arising of anxiety, that sort of peaking experience inside. And if you haven't, chances are you may know someone who has. And if you haven't, chances are very, very good you may be with someone someday who is. So a little bit about just kind of the mechanics of this as we get more familiar with this whole topic. Anxiety is sort of a generalized response to an unknown threat. So we all have this sort of, I don't know about we all, but many of us have this sort of generalized low-grade fever, anxiety. It doesn't really have a name, but it's just sort of that sense of existential angst. Fear is a little more focused. So fear is about a kind of a known external danger. So there's a big difference there between generalized anxiety and kind of focused fear. And then panic is sort of like, it's an abrupt surge of intense fear. And it's accompanied by all kinds of physical and mental symptoms. So anxiety is part of your emotional wiring. It's part of that protective response that's kind of hardwired in the body. But panic it's the explosion, the surge, the intense wave, the spike of that. And it's interesting to kind of explore what is it that can trigger panic. And there can be a wide variety of reasons. It can be a health issue, getting a diagnosis. Some medications can absolutely trigger panic attacks. Too much caffeine, low blood sugar, the dread that comes with like a financial crisis. Some people find what triggers them more than anything is being in social situations like a party or public speaking. Sometimes a chronic conflict with another person can trigger a panic attack. But quite often it's a personal trigger. It might be kind of the anxiety that you have around traveling that gets more and more intense over time. For some people, it can be a smell or a song or just anything that might trigger like a memory that's undigested, like a memory that has you feeling unsafe. When you experience a panic attack, or if you see someone who's experiencing a panic attack, there's this sort of inner sense of like this intense fear of being out of control. sometimes it can feel like you're dying. The intensity inside is so severe. It feels like you're either gonna die or you're gonna lose consciousness. And quite often it gets dramatically exacerbated if you're in a public situation. Just the fear of embarrassment. So panic will show up in the mind, it'll show up in the body, and mentally it can feel like you're getting more and more detached. There can be feelings of unreality, that sense of losing control, like you're dying. And physically it can show up very intensively as maybe a pounding heart or sweating or trembling or shaking. There can be a shortness of breath or chest pain, a feeling like you're choking, you can't get enough breath. There can be nausea, dizziness, numbness, hot flashes. I see it clearly with our dog when a thunderstorm shows up. Suddenly there's the trembling and the panting and the shortness of breath. It's the nervous system just sort of taking over. So what's happening is when you experience a panic attack or you're with someone who's having a panic attack, it's the autonomous fight or flight response that takes over. The physical symptoms they're more intense than anxiety. And anxiety kind of builds gradually. Panic attacks come on really, really fast. And of course, they'll trigger fear and they'll trigger worry about this loss of control or maybe having another attack. And how these things begin to build. There's this quite an amazing story of this woman who shared how she was, when she was a kid, she was on a plane ride, and they hit some turbulence. And the turbulence terrified her, and she could see that her mother, she was traveling with her mother was really, really freaked out and concerned about her as well. And what she noticed then was, like, every time she'd get on the plane or thinking about getting on the plane, she would start to have more anxiety. And it got worse and worse, because sometime after that, she was on a plane and she had a panic attack. And she could, just that intense wave of feeling out of control. And then every time she would think about getting on a plane, she would be afraid about having a panic attack. And it got to the point where she wouldn't travel at all. She wouldn't even get in the car. And the good news is, and we'll talk a little bit about how to kind of work and how to begin to kind of unwind these panic attacks, so that she found a way to work with it. But it's a dangerous world out there. As Tarzan said to Jane, it's a jungle out there. How do you work with this? Or how can you help someone? One of the things that can occur when you start to feel that sense of overwhelm, and one of the most important things is that as you get more familiar with your anxiety, as you get more familiar with fear, as you get more familiar with what sets you off, it's unique to each one of us. For some people, it's just the smell of something, or as I said, a song. For some people, they don't even know what it is, but suddenly they can begin to feel that sense of something terrible is going to happen. Like, it's a sense of dread. There can be this sense of, like, you're going to pass out, you're going to be sick, and that question of, like, how do I manage this? It's a flooding. So maybe you've had times of that. Just that sense of, like, the sense of dread, the sense like you might lose control. It's this existential moment. It's like the controlling sense of self, like the controller inside is losing its grip. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the suggestions that may resonate for you, and some may not. But the essence of it comes down to the two wings of practice. And the two wings of mindfulness Again, wisdom and compassion. Wisdom is recognizing what's happening. It's about naming it. And compassion is exploring how you can be with it. And it's these two wings that we need to draw on, particularly when it feels like it's impossible to draw on them. So the one thing you can do is, when you feel it coming on, is to recognize it. And sometimes just naming it can be helpful. And if you're new to these experiences, it can feel like this is the first time it's ever happened. But quite often you can ask yourself, have I experienced this before? Is this familiar? And have I gotten through this? And someone was sharing with me how when they can begin to feel that, they feel the trigger, they feel the clench, they feel like something horrible is going to happen. They're going to experience this, that there's something inside now, as they've turned to get more mindful, more aware of this dynamic, where they can say, I know what this is, and I've gone through it before. And as soon as they can say, I know what this is, or they can even just say out loud, oh, I'm having a panic attack, the naming of it begins to cultivate the shift. What kind of happens is you're stimulating the prefrontal cortex. You're recognizing the sense of being flooded or being out of control. And it can kind of begin the process. I've been through this before. Is a very, very powerful thing. Then the question becomes, can I be with it? What do you need to be with it right now? And for some people, and again, it depends where you are. If you're alone, it can be very, very helpful to, again, kind of say, like, I've gotten through this before, and kind of recall what got you through it before. But I think for many people, at least in my experience, what I've noticed is that when you're feeling that surge of overwhelm, there's an incredible self-consciousness about feeling like you're losing control in front of other people. So what some people have found is just to say, I'm going to be okay, but I'm really feeling sick right now, and I just need some time. Sometimes letting other people know what's happening can be so, so helpful. Just to say, I feel like I'm going to be sick, I'm going to be okay, but I just need a little bit of space right now. It's a very, very powerful self-soothing practice. Sometimes you can't even do that because it's so, so overwhelming. And what you may find is, and again, if you experience these, and equally if you're with someone, about remembering that how people respond, and very few people respond when you're having this kind of a crisis. They're reacting. That their reaction it's not about you. You won't remember this in the moment, at least, but they're reacting. They're trying to soothe themselves, and that's when you'll hear, like, should I call an ambulance? Some people have told me that when they start to feel this panic attack, that someone actually just yells at them, get it together, breathe, get it together. Not helpful, but it's not about you. It's about their own anxiety. Probably one of the best things you can do is to focus on your breathing. Now, it's important to say that for some people, focusing on the breath can actually be triggering. Because when you focus on the breath, it can actually sometimes exacerbate the concern you're not going to get enough breath. But I'd like to maybe just share with you a few techniques, and then we can kind of practice them together, because you might find it helpful for yourself. But also, there have been many, many occasions in my life where it's been very, very helpful for me when I'm accompanying someone who's going through one of these sort of crises. One of the most helpful things you can do, and if you like, you can do this now, is just focus on your nose. Just kind of bring your eyes so you're focusing on the tip of your nose. And then breathe into the count of 4 or 5. And then breathe out to the count of 4 or 5. And just for the next few moments here, focus on the tip of your nose. Breathe in slow to the count of 4 or 5, and then at the inhalation, move right into the breath out to the count of 4 or 5. And we'll just do this for maybe 45 seconds. And one more slow breath. And then you kind of release the breath, or just take a moment and just sense any little internal shift you may have found. And some people find this helpful. When we feel overwhelmed, quite often our attention is super, super scattered. And the antidote to that is focus, kind of arriving in one place. So like focusing the gaze on the nose. You're giving this very, very scared mind a job to do. And when you're focusing on the breath, it can be a very, very powerful technique. And again, for some people, it's not. Another breath that you can do, and this is a great self-soothing technique anytime, is the same thing of like focusing on your nose. So like your eyes are open, you're grounded, you're aware of the space. And you're going to breathe into the count of 4 or 5, but then you exhale through the mouth. But you can try, like, imagine you're sipping through a straw. So you're breathing out through pursed lips and you're breathing a longer exhalation. So let's just try this. So if you like, focus your attention on the tip of your nose. And now breathe in slowly to, let's say breathing in at the count of 5. And now through pursed lips, like you're whistling, breathe out to the count of 8. Breathe in through your nose to the count of 5. And breathe out, relaxing to the count of 8. And again, you can just continue for a few more rounds of breath and just track what it feels like inside to both focus your gaze and focus on the counting, but also on the exhalation to relax and to feel and soften. Now, if you would, just relax your breath and just close your eyes if you like, and just sort of register the effect, feel the imprint of that breath. Notice anything that may have shifted for you. So when you're ready, you can open your eyes. There's this young guy just kind of like starting off just after he'd passed the bar. And he got a job in a law firm in Boston. And very, very intense situation, was very self-conscious around fitting in. And he started having panic attacks. And how they showed up for him was that he would start to feel lightheaded when he was talking to people. And again, sort of there's just the self-consciousness and so forth, and the negative self-talk and all that sort of thing. And he just told the story of how he was with a meeting with a a colleague in the colleague's office, and they're talking about a certain situation, what he was going to do, and how his strategy for how he's going to contribute to this case. And he started to feel the lightheadedness come on. He could feel the trigger. And what he said was like, I'm feeling a little bit, I'm just feeling really lightheaded, and I feel like I might get sick. Would you mind getting me a glass of water? And so his colleague went to get him a glass of water. And as his colleague was getting him the glass of water, he focused on his breathing. Because he learned the technique of focusing on breathing. And by the time his colleague came back with a glass of water, he was already kind of on the other side of the wave. And he said for him, it's so helpful to be able to recognize the early warning signs. And then to give himself the permission to kind of take that time just to focus inside on his breath. He said, he recognized, he said, it's like riding a wave. It's a very, very intense wave. And once you know what it is, he said, you can learn how to disarm it. And I take some solace in that. So breath can be very, very helpful. Another very practical thing is using cold. One person swears 8 ounces of cold water can be very, very helpful, or a cold towel on your face or the back of your neck. Another technique, which some people find very, very helpful, and again, these are very, very simple, but I have learned over the years it's the simple stuff that's the most effective, is the contraction release. So we can just do this for a moment if you like. You can, if you just close your eyes and just feel your palms, and now bring your palms into fists. Begin to tighten and squeeze. Squeeze your fists. Really, really tight, really, really tight. And now release. Relax the palms. And just let your awareness just flood into the palms and fingers and thumbs, and feel that sense of softening. And again, you can open your eyes, and this can be a very, very helpful tool. Just the sense of squeeze, contraction, focus, and release. You can do it throughout the body, but just that simple movement can be very, very helpful. So this intense wave of panic, anxiety, it'll quite often reach its peak in minutes. That's one of the characteristics of it. It's like this rush of a wave. It can feel terrifying. But again, the more familiar you can be with it, the more it can develop a sense of confidence that you can be with it. And what I've found is just being aware of these techniques can be so helpful if you're around anyone who is experiencing this. Sometime back, I was on a plane, and it was one of those situations where I had an open seat next to me. The plane was just about full, and then here comes someone. I realized, this is the person who's going to be sitting next to me. And this woman was quite large, and as she settled into her seat, she was sort of like spilling over into my space. I could feel all my reactivity, all my judgments. But as soon as we started chatting, I just got, she had a real sweetness to her. And as the plane was taxiing and getting ready, I noticed that she was getting really, really pale. Her breathing was speeding up. She was gripping the seat. And I just sensed that she was feeling really, really claustrophobic because she was like jammed into this tight seat. And I realized that she was on the verge of feeling the panic, overwhelm. And then I realized that if I panic about her panic, we're in serious trouble. And so I just asked her, I said, are you feeling anxious right now? She goes like, I'm really, really scared. And I just said, wow, I really know that feeling. And I learned this trick that's been really, really helpful for me. Would you like to try it? And so I invited her into the breath. And I actually breathed with her a little bit. And I could just see the grip begin to soften, the grip on the armrest. Her breath started to normalize a little bit. And I realized that for me, because I could recognize it inside myself, just the capacity to accompany her was really what she needed. Quite often when I imagined if I were having a panic attack, what would I need in that moment? Quite often it's not anyone to fix me. It's just someone to really accompany me, to kind of help normalize the experience. So I didn't do anything really fancy. I just let her know I was there, and we breathed together, and we moved kind of beyond that. So can you imagine being with someone who's having a panic attack in your life? Someone who might be feeling kind of that surge of feeling out of control, the chest pounding, the sweating, all of that. How would you want to be with them? And this is where I find this beautiful teaching in these practices of getting familiar with what's between us and feeling free. And familiarity is what leads to wisdom. So if you feel panic or you know someone who suffers from panic attacks, is it possible to get familiar with the triggers? What is it that begins? What are the early warning signs? Some people find that when they can begin to sense the trigger and the early warning signs, some people find exercise is helpful, like speed walking, texting a friend saying, wow, I'm really feeling something coming on. Having an ally nearby can be helpful. And if this is an issue, or you know someone for whom this is an issue, the good news is this is all treatable. And meditation can be very, very helpful. Cognitive therapy has helped so many people. Somatic therapy, like learning how to navigate your nervous system when you feel panic coming on. Medications can be tremendously helpful if you find yourself kind of getting paralyzed. If you find yourself, what many people have found is that when you're aware of the trigger, you feel it kind of coming on, and you're in a social situation, which makes it so much more chronic, just to say, if you can, to say, I get these episodes of panic attacks. I'm going to be okay, but I just need a little quiet time and maybe some cold water. That can be a really helpful way of kind of naming it, kind of naming what you need, and then you're allowing people to support you. That the thing of, what you can't communicate controls you really comes into play here. I think so much of this comes down, again, to suffering, stress, anxiety, dissatisfaction, unsteadiness of mind. These qualities of what the Buddha referred to as dukkha are part of the human experience. We all, to some degree, experience this. When we can begin to open to that reality in ourselves, and particularly that reality for each other, it begins to open the possibility of empathy and compassion and kindness. To recognize suffering and stress when it arises. And to recognize that if you turn toward it, that there is this possibility of opening into a greater sense of ease, a greater sense of aliveness, and a greater sense of the goodness of life. Let's close with a very short little meditation. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might just sense in your own way the stress, the worry, the anxiety that pervades this whole human experience. And just reflecting on the following words, these classic words of metta, of loving kindness. As I wish to be happy, may all beings be happy. As I wish to feel peace, may all beings feel peace. As I wish to feel free from stress and suffering, may all beings in all directions feel free from stress and suffering. You might take 3 slow, full, deep breaths right now. Just notice where you feel the breath on the inside. As you're ready, you can open your eyes. This essential truth that stress and suffering and dissatisfaction are part of the human experience is so important. Our capacity to recognize, to name it, but also to remember that it's possible to let go. If we let go a little, we can feel a little bit of ease. If we let go a lot, we can feel a lot of ease. And I take heart in the fact that there are these practices. And I also take heart that I'm not alone, that we're truly all in this together. I'm honored and grateful to share this time with you. Best wishes to you, and I look forward to being with you again. Thank you so much.